الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال في مقام آخر يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. We begin by praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ask Him for guidance and forgiveness. And we seek protection in Allah from the evil of our souls and the evil of our actions. Whomever Allah guides, no one can lead him astray. And whomever He leads astray, no one can lead him back to the right path. And we bear witness that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah Himself, no associate to Him. And we bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His final prophet and messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, O you who believe, fear Allah. Fear Allah as He should be feared, and do not die except in the state of Islam. And He says, O you who believe, fear Allah, and always say a word directed to the truth, that He may make your conduct whole and sound, and forgive you for your sins. And he that obeys Allah and His Messenger has then attained the highest achievement. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst people who live and die upon piety and righteousness. Ameen, Allahumma ameen. My dear beloved brothers and respected sisters in Islam, before I actually delve into the content of this khutbah, I do want to preface that this is a khutbah related to mental health. And I am not by any means a mental health professional, nor am I studying anything that is directly related to the field of mental health. However, I've done extensive research, looked through multiple articles, tafasir, ahadith, ayat, and inshallah this khutbah will be of benefit inshallah. But if I do make mistakes, please forgive me and please correct me afterwards inshallah. So we'll begin by touching on an article that came out of the JIMA, that is the Journal of the Islamic Medical Association of North America, whereby the authors of this article conclude that there are several major impediments facing Muslim Americans when it comes to being treated for mental health issues. And one of the impediments that they mention is, and I quote, many clients have strong reservations about modern psychiatry, and some still seek out traditional healers. In other words, there are many members of the Muslim American community that are very skeptical. They see approaching a mental health professional as sort of deviating from the framework, from the scope that Islam provides to take care of the self, to take care of mental health. And now we're approaching this Western secular approach. My brothers and sisters, this mindset is extremely dangerous. This is extremely dangerous, and this is one of the major contributors to the mental health crisis. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says himself in a hadith narrated by Al-Muhsan al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu, he says, "Man asbaha aminan fi sirbihi, mu'afan fi jasadihi, عنده طعام يومه فكأنما حيزت له الدنيا." The Prophet ﷺ says, whoever wakes up feeling safe, feeling content in their sirb. One of the meanings of sirb is an-nafs wal-qalb, the self, the heart. This is the mental health aspect. Mu'afan fi jasadihi, that they're physically healthy. عنده طعام يومه, they have their food for the day. فكأنما حيزت له الدنيا, it's as if they have possession of the entire world. Rasulullah ﷺ in this specific hadith, he never mentioned spiritual health. He never mentioned spiritual well-being. And while it is important, he just mentions mental health and physical health. And so our tradition, it recognizes mental health. It recognizes the importance of mental health. And unfortunately, many people in the community, including even imams, they will say what? That as long as someone is a true believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as long as they have true yaqeen, certainty in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it is impossible for them to experience mental health issues. I'm sorry to say this, brothers and sisters, but that is complete nonsense. That is complete nonsense. Who said that? And if we look at the most knowledgeable, the most God-fearing person that ever worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was the Prophet ﷺ. He says, "Inna atqakum wa a'lamakum billahi ana." The most God-fearing and knowledgeable person when it comes to Allah is me. So we look at his life. We look at the perfect example of perfect spiritual well-being. And how did he deal with his issues in his life? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran, we read this every Friday, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِيًا نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. That perhaps out of how much grief you are having because these people are not believing in the Quran, that you are going to end up killing yourself. This is literally the wording that Allah uses in the Quran. Do we understand how much grief someone has to go through? How much stress someone has to go through for their cause of death to be their grief itself? This is our Prophet ﷺ. And And so, once again, mental health is a concept that exists in our tradition. And mental health has deep roots in the Islamic tradition. And for anyone who is facing depression, anxiety, or any other mental health issue, there is hope for you. Jabir radiallahu anhu narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاء فَإِذَا أُصِيبَ دَوَاءُ الدَّاءِ بَرَأَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. This is in Sahih Muslim. Rasulullah sallallahu says, for every single sickness, for every single illness, there is a cure. And when the remedy is applied to the disease, it is cured by the permission of Allah. And under the explanation of this hadith, Shaykh Taha Muhammad al-Sakit, he says that sickness, it splits up into two types. There's two types of sicknesses. There's one, al-badani, the physical sickness, whatever happens to the physical body. And then there is al-marad al-ruhi, the internal sicknesses. They can be spiritual illnesses, it can also be nafsi, it can be the mental illnesses. And for every type, there is an appropriate cure. For physical sicknesses, there's a physical cure. For spiritual sicknesses, a spiritual cure. And similarly, for mental sicknesses, there are mental cures. We have to be able to recognize this concept and to touch upon the notion that I don't want to approach a mental health professional because, why should we? Because the Prophet ﷺ himself never had a therapist. Oh, who said that? Who said the Prophet ﷺ never had a therapist? He did have a therapist. His name was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a couple graduate students from Jami'at al-Najah lil-Abhath, a research university in Palestine, they wrote this beautiful research article that just talks about this. That just talks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would console His Prophet ﷺ and the other prophets and righteous servants. The article is titled Tasliyatul Anbiya wal Awliya. I highly recommend, if you know how to read Arabic, that you read this article. And the authors of this article conclude, and I quote, هنالك الكثير من الآيات الواردة في القرآن الكريم والتي تتجاوز 170 آية ذكر كثير من أهل التفسير في كتبهم أنها تفيد معنى التسلية. That many of the scholars of tafsir count at least 170 ayat in the Quran that serve the sole purpose of providing comfort for the Prophet. 170 ayat. That is more than 2.7% of the Quran. And you want to tell me that mental health is not a part of Islam? It would be harder to actually argue that mental health is not a part of Islam. Furthermore, most of these ayat were revealed in the Meccan stage when the Muslims needed it because they were the small minority. This is the time when they were severely rebuked and punished and humiliated. Children seeing their parents murdered in front of their own eyes. Parents seeing their children murdered in front of their own eyes. Bilal radiallahu anhu, his bare back placed on the scorching heat of the sand, big rocks on his chest, and he's being told to give up his religion. Rasulullah ﷺ praying in public, he had animal intestines thrown on his back. This is what was happening. And in a time like this, people might think that what am I suffering for? What am I suffering for? And this is why so much, one of the main themes that the Mecca ayat talk about is akhirah, 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 because it's reminding them, this is your end goal. This is what you're fighting for. This is what you're sacrificing for. And when we look at, when we study the seerah, we study how these people were punished. Do we really genuinely believe that they didn't experience any sort of trauma or any sort of mental hurdles? That khalas, like isbir wattaqillah wa tamshi al-umur. هذا حكي فاضي. This is a complete miscontextualization of the seerah, and we have to be able to recognize this, my brothers and sisters. And throughout my research, I noticed that as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing, as He's consoling the Prophet ﷺ, He basically, and this is based on my own observations, that He basically constructs a model of how good, proper, appropriate therapy should be. 4 points that I noticed. Number one, the therapist has to be someone that cares enough. And there's no one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves more than the Prophet ﷺ. Number two, the therapist has to know the situation well enough. And in Allah's case, He knows it perfectly. All hearing, all seeing, all knowledgeable, all wise. This is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Number three, they have to be able to effectively address the trauma and the stressors that are affecting this individual. And number four, provide effective solutions and be able to change their outlook on life. And this is basically what a lot of, seeking help from mental health professionals, this is what it's like. It just involves talk therapy. This is what they do. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll prescribe you on medicine. It's just talking about the problems. Maybe that's the only thing that will get the individual to progress. And an example of this, the kuffar, the disbelievers, over the life of the Prophet ﷺ, they made many accusations against him. They called him a magician, a poet, a liar, all these things. And how many ayat in the Quran do we read that start with وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا? The disbelievers said this, they said this. What is Allah doing there? He's addressing the trauma. He knows that this is hurtful to the Prophet ﷺ. So he's like, let's talk about it. That's what Allah is doing there. And one of these ayat that I'll talk about, it says وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْلَا نُزِّلَ عَلَيْهِ الْقُرْآنُ جُمْلَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. The disbelievers said, why doesn't the Quran why isn't it just revealed all at once upon the Prophet ﷺ? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He consoles the Prophet ﷺ. He explains why. He explains the wisdom. كَذَلِكَ لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. We did so we can reassure your heart. We want to show you that we're always there for you. We want to show you that we care for you, that we're not unaware of what's going on. And again, this is why all these ayat of tasliyah come, most of them rather, they come in the Meccan period. And so we'll look at a couple examples that these graduate students mentioned in the research to honor their work. First of all, we'll look at Al-Isra wal-Ma'raj. We can't talk about mental health within the seerah without covering Al-Isra wal-Ma'raj. Isra wal-Ma'raj was not just a journey in which the Prophet ﷺ ascended to the heavens and he was meeting the prophets, he was all fun and games. No, this was the therapy session for the Prophet ﷺ. When did Isra wal-Ma'raj happen? After Aam al-Huzn, a whole year where the Prophet ﷺ experienced sadness. After the death of his uncle Abu Talib, who was his biggest support system growing up, after the loss of his parents, after the loss of his grandfather. Now Abu Talib was the individual that turned him into a man. He allowed him to become a man. And then a couple months, and by the way, he died without Islam, which even added even more to the trauma. And then about 2 or 3 months later, then he experienced the passing of his beloved wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, who he had 6 kids with, who was his biggest emotional and financial support. In every regard, she was always the one supporting him. Whatever he was trying to do, she was always there. His support system gone within 2 to 3 months. Imagine what kind of trauma Prophet ﷺ is experiencing. And above that, the boycott was still happening. The Muslims are barely able to survive. They're barely able to put food in their mouths. And Rasulullah ﷺ is the leader of his community. Imagine what sort of pain he's going through. And it was so emotionally overwhelming, mentally overwhelming for the Prophet ﷺ, that he decides to leave his city, to leave Mecca, in hopes that I'm going to go to Ta'if, I'm going to give da'wah to this community. Hopefully, I will gain some support, and they will show me some support and aid me against my own people. But they treated him the complete opposite way. They completely humiliated him. They stoned him so bad. Even the kids, they stoned him so bad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was bleeding so much that his blessed feet got stuck to his sandals. That's how much he was bleeding. That's how much he was humiliated. And Rasulullah ﷺ later in his life, he would describe Ta'if as the hardest day in his life. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at a time like this, when someone's experiencing so much trauma, it's natural for someone to think, did I do something wrong? Does Allah hate me? And this is, when we read Dua Ta'if, this is one of the things that Rasulullah ﷺ says. إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ بِكَ غَضَبٌ عَلَيَّ فَلَا أُبَالِي. Ya Allah, just as long as you're not mad at me, it's okay. I don't care. I'll be content with what happens. As long as you're not mad at me. This is the Prophet ﷺ saying this. Imagine all the trauma that he suffered. And this is the individual that is our leader and our example of spiritual well-being, saying this. And because of these incidents, because of Aam al-Huzn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the entire Surah Yusuf upon the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ was able to basically correlate where he is in his life with all this sadness and grief to where Yusuf a.s. and his father were in their lives. وَبِيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ Yaqub alayhi salam, he lost his eyesight because of how much he was crying, because of his sadness. Right? But the surah has a beautiful ending. So it's basically Allah foreshadowing the Prophet ﷺ that you're at a hard time in your life, you're experiencing the worst grief of your life. Just know, however, that there is a good ending for you. And this is exactly what happened. Fatih Mecca, when the Muslims conquered Mecca, they walked into Mecca, and the Meccans they're like, we're done. They're gonna kill us. Prophet ﷺ had what? Surah Yusuf on his mind. And he recited the ayah, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. There's no blame upon you. This is Rasulullah ﷺ. Look how much Surah Yusuf came in his life. And this was also when Rasulullah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel alayhi salam and Buraq to allow Rasulullah ﷺ to ascend to the heavens. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying, hey, Prophet ﷺ, I want to talk to you. Come up to me. This is basically his journey, subhanallah. And before he actually gets on Buraq, Jibreel alayhi salam tells Buraq, he tells this animal that will carry the Prophet ﷺ up to the heavens. He says, مَا رَكِبَكَ أَحَدٌ أَكْرَمُ مِنْهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. There has never been a human being who has ridden you, who is more honorable in the sight of Allah than Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he says furthermore, Ya Buraq, هذا حبيب الله ورسول رب العالمين أفضل من أهل السماوات والأرضين. Jibreel alayhi salam is telling Buraq, he's like, hey Buraq, this is the most beloved creation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the messenger of the world and the best of creation in the skies and the earth. Show him respect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows the Prophet ﷺ to hear this whole conversation. And he felt so content at that moment. And the whole journey, once again, was just to remove all the fear and the anxiety and stress from his life, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. For time's sake, we'll briefly touch on one more story, and then we'll end the first khutbah. Quraysh used to say to someone who has lost the males from their children, the boys from their children, that this person butted, this person's lineage is cut off. And so Prophet ﷺ, he had 7 children. 3 of them were boys. And he lost all 3 of his boys within his lifetime. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. After he lost his 3rd child, his 3rd son, Ibrahim, the narration mentions, مَشَى الْمُشْرِكُونَ بَعْضُهُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ فَقَالُوا إِنَّ هَذَا الصَّابِئَ قَدْ بُتِرَ اللَّيْلَ. These mushrikun, they were coming up to one another. They were happy, they were celebrating, they were laughing. They're like, look, see this person that left our religion, that left the religion of our forefathers? Look what happened to him. His lineage is cut off. And imagine, like, losing a child itself is arguably the worst feeling that anyone could experience. And may Allah never allow us to experience that. Imagine the leaders of your community are making fun of you for losing your child. What kind of sick people do that? But this is what Rasulullah ﷺ had to go through. And one narration mentions, that's narrated by Anas radiallahu anhu. He says, one time we were sitting in front of the Prophet ﷺ, we were in his presence, and he was dozing off, he was about to fall asleep. All of a sudden, he picks up his head and he starts smiling. And the Sahaba are like, you okay? What happened? Why are you smiling for? And he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just revealed a surah on me. And he recites the shortest surah in the Quran. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. We have given you al-kawthar. And the Prophet ﷺ is so happy. He just lost his son. He just lost Ibrahim radiallahu anhu. And he's smiling, he's so happy. He's telling the Sahaba, Atadruna mal kawthar? Do you know what al-kawthar is? And they said, oh no, Allah wa Rasuluhu alam. Allah and His Messenger are more knowledgeable. He says, that فَإِنَّهُ نَهْرٌ وَعَدَنِهِ رَبِّي عَزَّ وَجَلَّ عَلَيْهِ خَيْرٌ كَثِيرٌ. That this is a river. This is a river that Allah promised me on the Day of Judgment. There's so much khayr in it that هُوَ حَوْضٌ تَرِدُ عَلَيْهِ أُمَّتِي يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ آنِيَتُهُ عَدَدُ النُّجُومِ. That people will come from my nation, they will come to this river, and the amount of cups to drink from this river are equal to the amount of stars. Subhanallah. And the Prophet ﷺ was made so content that Allah addressed his trauma. He said, you know, the loss of your sons, I know it's causing you trauma. But you know what? We're going to replace the loss of your sons with Al-Kawthar. This is providing an effective solution. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was able to effectively address the trauma. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to drink from the blessed hands of the Prophet ﷺ from Al-Kawthar. قُولُوا قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِسَائِرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. We'll quickly wrap up because of time. There is another article that came out of University of Michigan's Journal of Muslim Mental Health, whereby the researchers conducted a study, a survey. They sent it out to imams all across the United States. And the survey was to see that how experienced are our religious leaders when it comes to counseling and mental health. 62 imams in the United States returned this survey. And listen, the average age of imams in this survey, 49 years old. We're looking at the average 49-year-old imam. What is their experience with counseling and mental health? 18% of the imams reported they have absolutely no training. No training. An additional 27% of these imams reported one type of training. Maybe they taken some psychology class in college. Allahu A'lam if they even paid attention. So we're talking about every other imam in our community. They either have little to no experience when it comes to counseling and mental health. And so when our children are complaining from anxiety, depression, all these mental health illnesses and hurdles, and we're taking them to a spiritual counselor. I'm not trying to undermine the spiritual counseling work that our imams provide, but it's not necessarily the case that they'll be able to effectively address the mental health issues of our community. And we're literally gambling with the mental health of our children. And so we have to recognize this is a very important concept, that there is a difference between spiritual counseling and mental health counseling. That yes, sure, they may be interrelated, they may be somewhat related at times, but at the end of the day, they are two different concepts. And I'll end with this. The authors of this article conclude that in order to minimize disparities of mental health to the growing Muslim populations in the United States, number one, what has to happen? Imams have to become an important source of referrals. They have to build their network with the mental health professionals in our community. That when someone comes to imam and they don't know how to effectively address their issue, they know who to refer them to. This has to happen. That there must be a tight connection between mental health professionals and the spiritual leaders in our community. And of course, in addition, the parents have to provide a safe space at home for their children, where their children feel comfortable. Baba, mama, I'm going through this, and they won't be judged. Just because they're feeling sad, that doesn't mean they're majnoon. It's okay to experience sadness in your life. As we saw, the Prophet ﷺ experienced tremendous sadness in his life. And they end with this quote: with such collaboration, Muslim communities may be more likely to utilize community resources, clinicians will be more likely to provide culturally competent care, and imams will then be more effective in their collaborative role as de facto mental health providers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help this community, to help our community in relation to the mental health crisis. We have so many resources. We have a mental health department in this masjid. For people who don't speak English, there is a website. This is one of many resources. There's psychologytoday.com, where you can search up any therapist in your zip code, gender preference, along with language preference. There are so many therapists that you can find. utilize these resources. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. أهلا وصلي وسلم على من بعثه الله رحمة للعالمين، حيث أمرنا بالصلاة والسلام عليه، فقال عز من قال: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم، وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم انصر الإسلام وعز المسلمين، وانصر عبادك المستضعفين في كل مكان يا رب العالمين. اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات، المسلمين والمسلمات، الأحياء منهم والأموات، إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. وصلى اللهم وسلم على نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزد لكم واستغفروه يغفر لكم ويجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا. وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله. استووا استقيموا تراصوا سدوا الخلل. Straighten the lines and fill in the gaps. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر، إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد، الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده.
哦。 الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just a quick announcement. The ICD summer program is starting inshallah on Monday, 4 days a week, ages 5 to